All right, I am here with Scott Bennett, U.S. Army Special Operations Officer and Global Psychological Warfare Counter-Terrorist Analyst. Scott, how are you? It's great to have you back on the Duran. We've had quite a news week in the last 2 days, actually. There's a lot that we can start to dissect, and your expert analysis will hopefully help our viewers understand what's going on. There's been a lot written so far about Trump and his announcements to pull out the U.S. troops from Syria. We can get into the reasons why, what could happen. But to me, one of the most interesting parts was the massive pushback that he got from within his administration, from outside his administration, mainstream media, journalists, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, all the publications, John Bolton, Obama White House officials. I mean, it's tremendous. What do you make of what's happening here, Scott? Can Trump get through this? What's your view of things? Tell us. It's big news.
Well, let's just sum it all up. It's the right thing to do, and it should have been done a long time ago, but it's the absolute right thing to do, and the American people support it. Now, that being said, if I was advising the president and sitting next to him at a table or something, I would say, Mr. President, all of the people that are going to be opposed to this are on the opposite side of the American people. So always remember, the American people got you elected. The American people supported you because you wanted to normalize relations with Russia and pull us out of these endless wars. The fundamental miscommunication has been the media and the left do not understand the character of the American people. They have a contempt for the American people. Remember, I look at this from a psychological, sociological, anthropological, emotional, spiritual sort of construct. I look at all of the decision-making that come from the heart of man, and these people, like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and many people in the media and the Costas and all these people, they live in a bubble. They live in a fantasy world. They are delusional. They're of this attitude that they're intoxicated by their own reflection and their own words, and the American people are a bunch of sheep and cows in pasture that are just going to go along with whatever is fed to them. And that is a fundamental misunderstanding of the American people. It occurred during the election when people went into the voting booth and voted for Donald Trump or did not vote for Hillary Clinton. It's the same thing. So they've misunderstood and they've mischaracterized the American people. And forgive me, I've got a cold, so I'm struggling through this a little bit. But that fundamental misunderstanding of the American public is going to continue with their misunderstanding that the American public are passionately, although quietly, opposed to everything that we're doing in the Middle East. The American people have a contempt for Saudi Arabia, for the Wahhabi Saudi Arabia culture and mannerisms and aggressive disrespect and all of the sexual perversions and corruptions from, men with boys and all of that stuff. The American people are very sophisticated in understanding the depravity of Saudi Arabia, the depravity of the Middle East, Iran excluded. They also misunderstand that Iran is not a Middle Eastern culture. It's the Persian culture. But they do understand the depravity of Saudi Arabia. They understand that Russia is not the communist Soviet Union anymore. So they've been in sort of a quandary of why are we still stuck in this big, tar pit when we voted for Trump to pull us out, to get us in the right step with Russia and get us out of the Middle East. So Trump, I think, did that yesterday or day before Wednesday by declaring that America will remove its troops from Syria. That was a wonderful ringing of the bell. Now, of course, there are going to be people and institutions and lobby groups against him. Of course, they may even have a false flag attack, Alex. Let's never forget that they are notorious for this. The last time Trump said he was going to pull people out of Syria, they did a Syrian chemical attack. That was the white helmets. That was MI5, MI6, Mossad. But they may do the same thing again in this case. They may do another chemical attack. They may try and blame Assad for this. Although everybody who's went over there and come back, like Senator Dick Black and others, and Rand Paul and Tulsi Gabbard, have all said the Syrian government is not doing this. These are all false attacks. These are all propaganda activities. But they may try and do something serious. But that being said, I think Trump is doing a Reagan in the 1980s by pulling the Marines out of Lebanon. This was the pivot. This was the point where the president did the right thing, and he is publicly proclaiming it. It is a Kennedy moment because Kennedy was trying to do this with the Vietnam War. But there comes a time, as you and I talked about, there comes a time when you have to make a bold and strident move, and this is it. This is Trump's chance to say to the American people, you voted for me to get us out, and that's what I'm doing. And he has to couch it in the language of this is for the American people, by the American people, through the American people, and that way it takes it out of it's all, by Lindsey Graham, through the Senate, through the Congress, or through AIPAC, or all these other groups and institutions that want to get us bogged down in Syria, want to use us as a bulldozer throughout the Middle East, and want us to continue this encirclement campaign and slow strangulation of Iran and Russia and Ukraine and Crimea and that whole thing. So I'll end it here by saying I think the president needs severe and passionate and very clear and very supportive language from Russia, from Iran, from Turkey, from China. He needs to be held up on their shoulders because he is in a siege, he's in a civil war, and we know, like you said, there are so many people coming against him. You're going to have Newt Gingrich coming against Trump about this. You're going to have Fox News and all of these people trying to turn the president back. But hopefully he's not going to turn. He's going to stick on the side of the American people. But he needs others, Putin, Lavrov. He needs a whole slew of international figures, even Iran, to stand up and praise the president for this. And do it in a way that makes the American people see that he has gained more favor with these nations by this action, and therefore he's put himself in a better position for step number 2, which is making deals and arrangements and lifting sanctions and all these other things. So they've got to allow him to move to the next segment on the chessboard so that he can then come back and redo and fix things such as the missile agreement with Russia, JCPOA situation with Iran and other things. But this is a very hot battle space, and everyone's going to be attacking him. But that's why he needs everyone helping him at the same time.
How can they help him, Scott? My biggest worry is that, and maybe you can shed some light on this, is this a bridge too far for the deep state? Is this a red line that Trump should have never have crossed? You mentioned a Kennedy moment. God forbid, this is something analogous to what happened there. And the other part that worries me is that the minute Putin, the minute Russia, Lavrov, Iran, China lend any bit of support to Trump or say anything that's even remotely complimentary, all the forces at work are going to start right away saying, he's a Putin, he's a Kremlin, puppet, and he's on the payroll of Putin, and he's doing their bidding. They've boxed him in so effectively from inside and out that I'm trying to figure out. Maybe you can kind of show the way, the path for Trump to get out of this box.
I think the box that they've put him in, Alex, has been punched full of holes and is soggy and wet and coming apart like old cardboard. So you're right. They are going to scream Putin and Russia, Russia, Russia. They are going to scream nonsense like puppets of Putin. They are going to scream, we need to, keep ourselves there to dominate the world. But those arguments fall on deaf ears on the American people because they've heard them for the past 2 years. They've heard them through the whole Trump administration. So there's a season for everything. There is the ears of the people receiving this have changed in the past 2 years. They've been inoculated to the propaganda and the lies. They're not as susceptible. They're not as traumatized. They're not as shocked. They're not as triggered as they were 2 years ago. And that's a very important variable that's a very important background is the receptivity of the individual to receive the communication that they're going to be exposed to. Are they filtering it out to a certain extent? And I think they are, because of everything they've done to Trump for the past 2 years. The Russia hoax, the Russian meddling, the downloading of the DNC server information, CrowdStrike, Guccifer 2, the CIA programs that masquerade Russian language as if they had hacked into things. All of those things have built up in the arteries of the American people. They may not be able to articulate it on a very precise surgical timeline, but they do instinctively and through their intuition recognize that these are false lies and manipulative political ploys. So they're not going to be receptive. They're not going to be influenced to it. That's the deal breaker. As I said before, the deep state, the Lindsey Grahams, and quite frankly, most of these people that are on the side of this endless war and the side of Israel, I would not be surprised if there's videotape evidence of people like Lindsey Graham and others on Epstein Island, because that's how Mossad and the whole pressuring of these political American politicians is done. So when they speak, I instantly write them off as they're compromised. They've got a lot of deviancy over their head that is manipulating their whole vote. And Lindsey Graham he's put on the old man. He's once again John McCain's puppet when it comes to this, or his sidekick. But the American people, I don't think, are going to be as pressured or manipulated or moved. Quite the opposite. I think with Trump's constant announcement, this is a ongoing that he has to release through multiple days. He can't say one moment. He has to say, ladies and gentlemen, we've had victory, and I'm bringing your sons and daughters home, and we're going to make America great again. And he needs to continue that. We're not going to be in these other campaigns and such like that either. The more he does it, the more the media is kept off their guard. The more the big state Newt Gingriches and such can't focus on one thing. But the American people he is boxed in to a certain extent, but not to the point where it's going to cost him the political election. I think quite the opposite. This action appeals to the Greens and the anti-war types as well. So he can begin over the next 2 years building upon this non-confrontational, non-interventionist, America first attitude to build him inroads again with the people that would be required to keep him in the White House in 2 years. And those are independents. Those are non-Republicans. He has to win them.
Well, what's your take, Scott, before we close out this segment, on the liberal? You mentioned the anti-war people. You mentioned Tulsi Gabbard and Rand Paul. So we have a Democrat and we have a Republican. And those people have come out in support of Trump. What do you make of the liberal left, what's been known as the Democrat Party, that was usually anti-war, that was against intervention? They've been probably the loudest voices to attack Assad, to overthrow the Assad government, for a buildup of the U.S. military in the Middle East. What's happened to these people? And I want to throw in a lot of people in Hollywood, a lot of people that say they're, for peace, they're not against, they're against killing, they're against all these things. But when it comes to this issue, Syria, war, U.S. intervention, U.S. revolutions in the Middle East, these are the people that are coming out and are the loudest voice. What's going on in their head? Does Trump elicit that so much anger and so much resentment that they'll support any kind of war, any kind of killing, any kind of bombing, as long as Trump is removed? I mean, get into the psychology of what's happened to the anti-war movement, the Democrats, the liberals.
In one respect, and I'm very serious when I say this, there is a rampant intoxication in this country from statin drugs and pharmaceuticals that have deteriorated the cholesterol of the human brain because of the anti-heart attack, anti-cholesterol objectives. And these are Lipitor and all of the statins. And doctors have come out saying, if you're taking these statin drugs, you're guaranteed to get Alzheimer's and dementia. Guaranteed. And how many of these people in politics are over the age of 65 that are taking these drugs? And that explains their mental deterioration. So that adds to their already a liberal Democrat leftist psychosis of hating themselves, hating the world, hating God, wanting to upturn and overthrow everything. That's the nature of the left, to overthrow the old, conservative pillars and foundation, upturn everything, redefine marriage, redefine the family, outlaw, and at the same time, simultaneously exercise the same fascistic instruments to suppress freedom of speech. They're spiritually driven to a world where they're absolutely unaccountable and there is no right or wrong. There's just this humanist self-glorification that leads to fantasy world. It's hard for people to understand it because most conservatives are very rational, reasonable, balanced people. So when they encounter people that are not rational, reasonable, or balanced, they try and explain maybe there's something that just needs to be corrected. No, there's nothing that needs to be corrected. These people are insane. They've got serious dysfunctional psychological, emotional problems that may be masked by money and all these other things, but their decisions are reckless and ruinous, and that's at the heart of these Democrat choices. You add to that psychosis the animosity against Trump. He's an alpha male, and the big failure in American society and all societies is the beta male. The beta male rises up and attacks the alpha male through women. That's where you had women being encouraged by beta males to forcibly get the vote, beta males going in the Congress, giving women the vote in the 1900s to push them in these directions that broke up the marriage and family and the cohesion between husband and wives. We study this at Heritage. The cohabitation, the abortion, the pornography, all of that is driven into women by beta males. And beta males are a major in all societies. But the problem that you see rising on the left right now, and their animosity and hatred towards Trump, which is politically motivated for 2020, it's almost to a point where they're hysterical. They have no ability to compartmentalize either. They do not link all of these things together. And we do. We understand that Libya was an absolute failure because Obama and Sarkozy and Cameron unleashed and destroyed Libya. And what has that done but sent hundreds of thousands of Africans up into Europe that have added to the dysfunction and civil war that you see manifesting in the yellow vests right now in France. Yeah, there's some disconnects, but at their heart, it's connected to the overwhelming overthrow of traditional European culture. That makes Europeans more attracted to Russia, mind you, and Putin, because they, as Yeltsin said, need to be sort of the defenders of Europe. And the West doesn't seem to want to understand that. Europe and Russia have a closer ethnic bond and historical bond than the United States does. But the left doesn't see the failure of Libya as our fault. They don't see Syria as our fault. They don't see Iraq and Afghanistan as our fault. They don't even look at 9/11 and all of the deeper implications of that as a false flag attack to psychologically traumatize and push the American people in this direction of a juggernaut. So after 18 years in the alternative media and YouTube and Google and alternative websites and radio, I think you have real leadership and real bold people speaking the truth fearlessly and unapologetically that is rising up to Trump's office as well. I know I did a Press TV interview on this the day before Trump announced it, that all of these fiascos are going to cost him the election unless he takes a major hard pivot in the direction of peace and stability and pulling us out, and then he's gone ahead and done it. Well, I praise him for it, and I want him to do more, and I think the American people want him to do more. The key is, Alex, Trump needs international support for this, and they need to be directing us in a vision that says, with the U.S. pullout from Syria, we can stabilize that region. That keeps everybody, on their best behavior: Iran, Israel, Turkey, Syria, and Saudi Arabia. With Saudi Arabia's implosion and probably coup d'état and the upcoming removal of Mohammed bin Salman, that's going to change the dynamic. And then with Europe, I think Russia and the United States and Europe are going to have to come to a agreement over these missiles and these other conflicts in Ukraine. But the first fire to put out is Syria, and President Trump did that. So I think it's a very good thing. He is going to be attacked. but the American people are on his side. And as you could probably say, every single person in Europe would be on his side by saying, yes, we should be getting out of Syria because all these people are coming up into our European countries and we don't want them here.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, Scott, that Trump, whether he knows it or not, he probably does know it. I think he has excellent political instincts, even though he's not a politician. I think he knows that he has a very large base in the U.S. and around the world that does support this decision to move troops out of Syria. And I hope he gets that support.
Yeah, and again, I think the more international figures and leaders from Iran, from Russia, from China, from just elsewhere, applauding him. He's remember, on a psychological level, he needs applause, he needs support, he needs affirmation. That's the way he is. He's a certain kind of guy. He's been married a few times. He's had multiple wives and all that, and there's a deterioration of natural love in him because women who just marry you for your money, that doesn't really make you feel loved. So there's a coldness in his heart because of the women that he's been gone through multiple times, and it explains why he's philandered a little bit here and there. So it makes a vulnerability that can be, or a vacuum, an emptiness that can be satisfied by others, foreign leaders especially, applauding him, praising him, thanking him, and showing that is wonderful leadership, that is bold, that is smart, that is strong. The more words like that are projected onto a person like Donald Trump, who naturally have that ego and that emptiness and that bravado, that sort of macho, way, the more that's going to have a tremendous effect on him. The more he's applauded and praised. And I don't mean it in a silly way, and I mean it in a very sophisticated psychological warfare way. That is how you influence the behavior and the decision-making process of the president for the good, is you applaud him for the good he did and show him the absolute truth, the eternal spiritual truth and nobility and goodness of this action, of this direction, of this momentum. And naturally, you inoculate him by everyone who will attack you on the other side, are on the side of lies, death, corruption, and really insanity. To think that the U.S. is going to somehow dominate the rest of the world like the Tower of Babel or like the Empire Strikes Back or Star Wars saga has been a fantasy in the West since the fall of the Soviet Union, but it's an absolute demonic fantasy. And it also has been pushed by these Christian Zionist elements in America that have been pushing us to make war in the Middle East in this fulfillment of an apocalyptic timeline and the geopolitical Israeli Zionist connection. All of that, too, is nonsense. All of that is a complete lie.
Yeah, it's well said, Scott. There's a lot to unpack here, and I think in the next weeks and months we will be exploring this decision in great detail as it unfolds, because there's a lot of unknowns, and we'll see how it plays out. Scott, where can people find you so they can follow you, so that they can plug in? Shellgate Whistleblower?
ShellGameWhistleblower.com. That's the website. I've got my report and books and email and stuff up there. ShellGameWhistleblower.com. Right. And ShellGame is on Lulu.com. And incidentally, that's the next thing I think to fall in 2019 is the whole revelations of Shellgame and Hillary Clinton and Swiss banks and the Department of Justice and what they were really doing in 2009 before they got into uranium. And we've already briefed the White House and Tom Fitton and others about this. So this is going to explode, and perhaps that's one of the reasons that Trump is making a pivot, because he realizes there's a lot of other artillery that's going to start landing on the bad guys very soon.
That's another video that we should do for another time, because there's probably a lot to unpack there as well. Yeah. A lot of secrets that may be coming up. That's for sure, when you're talking about Hillary Clinton. Scott Bennett, thank you very much for that excellent analysis. Guys, we will be putting the links for where you can find Scott in the description down below. Everybody, you can follow the Duran by clicking that subscribe button. You can also click that notifications bell. You can go to the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt, 20% off all throughout December. And you can get a copy of this show on Soundcloud and on iTunes in audio format. Scott Bennett, thank you very much. Everybody, take care.
Thanks, Alex.